Hello and welcome to a new Games that Weren't video, where today I'm going to be looking at a slightly surprising sequel to a pretty rubbish 64 game that came out back in the day, which was called Captain Dynamo. And Captain Dynamo was a game that was released back in 1992 by Codemasters. It was a game that was created by Ian Gray, who was famous for doing a lot of Interceptor games such as Tales of the Arabian Nights. He also did Spirit of the Stones for Commodore, and then later went on to work for companies such as Players, doing conversions, and also then Codemasters, where most famously he converted a lot of the Dizzy games from the Spectrum to the 64. And Captain Dynamo was one of those titles that he did for Codemasters, but wasn't one of his sort of shining moments in glory. It was very badly received. It was slated by the press quite badly, and it was the last game you'd ever expect to really see a sequel. But a sequel was on the cards back in 1993, but you wouldn't have known about it. It wasn't advertised in the press. There was no kind of early warning scanner warning that the game is coming soon in Commodore format or anything like that at all. As far as I'm aware, anyway, I can't remember ever seeing anything of it. We first heard about the title back in 2005 when the game's artist Wayne Billingham first got in touch with us. So Wayne had seen another of his games in the archive, Mega Twins, which was the Capcom arcade conversion that was being done by Tiretex. He came forward saying that he was the graphic artist for that game, told us who the developer was and that kind of thing, but also mentioned that he worked on a number of other titles that never saw release, which included Captain Dynamo 2, which was quite a nice surprise really. We were aware that there were a number of Codemasters games that never saw release. There was a rumour sort of back in the mid to late 90s that when Codemasters came away from the 64 scene, they were in fact sitting on about 15 to 20 games that never got released or finished, which seemed like a ridiculous amount and such a waste. So we didn't believe it was that high, and that maybe someone was embellishing that number. But as the years went on, GTW sort of kept uncovering all of these different Codemasters games, so that figure didn't seem so ridiculous after all. So yeah, Captain Dynamo was being done by, worked on by Wayne back in 1993. He believed that he might have had something of the game on his discs, so very kindly loaned us all of his work discs. A couple of months later, we had all those discs come through, and we started sort of trawling through them in the hope that we might find something playable. And we found a number of previews for different games. We found a full game of Bobby Bounce Back, but sadly there was nothing of Mega Twins and nothing of Captain Dynamo 2 either. We just found this loading screen that you can see here, a number of sprites and the level maps, and that was about it. But nothing executable or playable at all. Or so we thought. So on our last scan, before we sort of sent all the discs back to Wayne, we noticed that one of the discs on the label had Captain Dynamo 2 preview written on it, but crossed out. And what had happened was Wayne had formatted over the disc and written some new sprite files onto the disc. Quite often back then it was quite a common thing to do. If you didn't have many discs, you just reformat a disc and reuse it, and that was it. You didn't really think anything that maybe 20 or 30 years later someone might actually want to get hold of that preview off the disc. So Wayne did that, not really thinking that anyone would be interested in the preview later down the line. But there was only a few sprite files written onto that disc. The whole disc hadn't been taken up. So we realised that we could try out a technique, which was to unformat the disc to try and see if we could get back the old data that was previously on there. So the thing is, when you do a format of a disc, if it's a soft format and not a complete heavy format, it doesn't actually fully delete the contents of that disc. All it does is delete the pointers to the files. So what happens is that data doesn't get overwritten until you start writing new data to that disc. So with that in mind, we did an unformat of the disc in the hope that preview might still exist, and that the sprite data that Wayne had written on hadn't overwritten key parts of that preview, and there was no guarantee of that. So we give it a go, and after a bit of poking around, we were very lucky to find what remained of that preview, which you can see here. And this was a frozen file that we managed to recover off of that disk, and it shows what is pretty much, I'd say, probably about 70 to 80% complete game. It is fairly playable. It's not completely playable to the point that you can complete each level, but you can interact with it, you can see the enemies, you can go through all of the levels. All of Wayne's graphics are in place and present and ready to go. There's a couple of glitches here and there. Unfortunately, there's no sound at all. It's completely silent, but it's something. It's something in the game which we didn't expect to see. So we're just going to kick into it now, and I'll kind of talk through a little bit what it's about. So here we've got a cutscene showing a rather large Captain Dynamo, slightly overweight compared to the first game, and a rather green Captain Dynamo as well. That aside, the graphics by Wayne are really nice and functional. Typical sort of Codemasters style graphics that you'd expect to see from a budget title from that time. And the idea is that we have to sort of travel around the globe, going to these different various locations and trying to collect these bombs to defuse within the time limit. So here you can see at the bottom panel, we've got that bomb with the fuse, which is gradually going down. And we have to sort of get to the other part of the map as quick as we can to find the next bomb before it explodes. In the case of this preview, it doesn't really matter, because if the fuse goes to the bottom, nothing actually happens when we get the next bomb. You can see here as well, if we go in the water or jump on the spikes or touch enemies, we don't actually die. It's literally just to kind of test the engine out, to see what the level maps are like. So possibly the game's developer produced this for Wayne just to kind of see his level graphics in situ and see if anything needed tweaking, perhaps, I don't know. So yeah, unfortunately, we've got a speed up there by the looks of it. We've got a speed up power up with a timer that's about to run out. Unfortunately, although you can sort of collect the bombs, go from left to right, I think there's about 8 to 10 bombs to collect until you're meant to sort of be able to go on to the next level. You can't actually move on to the next level at all. It kind of just, once you've collected all the bombs, it just sits there and kind of does nothing. But luckily there's a key built into the game which allows us to skip the level, so we can actually see the rest of the game, which we're going to do now actually. So the next thing we go on to is a bonus stage. So this is just a very simple sort of map where you have to collect the bombs. I don't know why there's a timer there. I think that must have been a power up that I've got previously. Okay, so unfortunately we can't skip the bonus level, so I'm going to have to bear with me as I try and manually go through it. So I might as well tell you a little bit about the game and who developed it. So the game itself was developed by a chap called Finlay Munro, who was famous for doing a number of games for Ocean Software, such as Adam's Family, Cool World, and I think Darkman as well. He was kind of a freelance developer and did quite a few games. I know him. One of the games I really enjoyed that he produced was Commando 86, or Duet, as it was known on the Elite hit pack, and that was sort of like a commando. It had the commando character, but in a sort of gauntlet clone. I don't think many people enjoyed it. I quite enjoyed it. It's kind of one of those early games that I played. But yeah, Finlay done quite a few games back in the day as freelance, and Captain Dynamo 2 was one of them. One of the late 64 titles he was doing. He was also working on another Codemasters title, which was a conversion of a NES game. I think it was Operation Gunship, which unfortunately I don't think got very far at all. And this was a fairly quick turnaround job for him. It's a very sort of simple game overall. But essentially, the game is just a very basic side-to-side scrolling platformer, and borrows heavily from Hawkeye and Flimbo's Quest. Really, there's nothing much more to it. Apart from that, it's what you'd expect for a budget game. It looks good, it's playable enough, it's better than most games that were being released at the time. It probably would have got maybe about 70 or 80% had it been reviewed in a magazine. So here we've got the Italy level with some nice graphics by Wayne again. Okay, I'm going to skip this one as well. So yeah, just very quick, basic game, which would have maybe only taken a few months to turn around quickly and sort of get out there. Okay, so this next bonus level, rather than collecting bombs, we have to shoot these enemies to get rid of them. Okay, and then collect the star in the middle. There we go. And then off to Switzerland. Okay, so this game was produced by a guy called Duncan Kershaw. So Duncan did quite a few games for Player Software back in the days as a developer. And then sort of went to Codemasters later on. He did DJ Puff and also Stuntman Seymour as well, and then eventually sort of got into producing games. So he had people like Finlay working for him and producing titles, and this was one of the titles, one of the first ones he was kind of arranging as a producer. I think it was under Reflective Designs at the time, I'm not fully sure. So again, some nice graphics there. Have to be careful because I'm going to get stuck in the background. I fall down there. Don't know how I can reach that bomb. Okay, I think I'm meant to get a power up or something. Okay, never mind. I'll just go to the end of the map and show you what it looks like. I've got some nice little parallax there as well. So what was interesting about Duncan, he's a very resourceful kind of guy, really, and this isn't a bad thing at all. When he was at Players Software, he basically had this very simple sort of scrolling shooter engine, which he sort of just reutilized a number of times for a couple of different games that Players released, just changing the background graphics and maps and adding a few gameplay elements, essentially just giving you a different game, and it worked really well. It allowed him to kind of knock out games very quickly and sort of make more money, basically. And he sort of took that idea onto Codemasters. So he created his own CJ's Elephant Antics engine, creating DJ Puff, and then shortly after the release of that, we used the same engine, did Stuntman Seymour, essentially the same game, just different graphics. When he became a producer, he had the same kind of approach, really. He got I'm stuck now. Let's go on to the bonus level. As well as Captain Dynamo 2, he also had CJ's Fourth, which was another title he's producing. The fourth title, even though the third game, CJ in Space, never saw release. That was essentially more the same kind of game. So it wasn't quite like Hawkeye or Flimbo's Quest, but it was the same sort of left to right scrolling. I think you just had to get to the end of the map in that particular games. But it could have just been Captain Dynamo with different sprites, even though both games had a different developer. They shared the same artist though, so possibly Wayne was able to kind of reuse some of his the premise of his graphics from this game in the CJ game. It was just a quick way of knocking out games really quickly and just making a quick bit of money. But compared to it, it wasn't so blatant all the time. It was just probably subtle enough so it was a different enough game to sell. So why was the game never actually released in the end? So basically this was due out in 1993, and it was around that time where Codemasters were kind of drying up their support, essentially. B-52 is due out in 1993, and that was actually fully reviewed by the magazines, but sadly Codemasters decided against releasing the game after they decided the market had disappeared. So even though sort of alternative software and a couple of other companies were still releasing games, Zeppelin for example, Codemasters decided just to move on to the NES and the consoles and the 16 bits, leaving behind quite a few titles, so believed to be 15 to 20 titles according to rumours. And this was one of the casualties. So it's believed this was actually completed, and actually features music and all the levels linked up correctly. Finlay believes that the game was completed. He assumed he just handed it in, got paid, and then heard nothing more. He never saw a published copy of the game. So most of the games that Duncan had involvement on had music that was done by Sonic Graffiti, so we assume that Sonic Graffiti also produced music for this title. Finlay unfortunately doesn't have anything in the title at all, so we're kind of hopeful that someday maybe Duncan or someone else might find a disc with it on and a more complete version. But otherwise, at the very least, we have this preview that gives you an indication of what might have been. Okay, so we've got the Tokyo level here, which doesn't really feel much like Tokyo. I think they were starting to run out of characters at this point. This is a little bit stretched. Fairly simple level compared to the others. Okay, let's move on. Okay, got another shooting bonus level. Yep. So at the end, I'll show you a very quick screenshot of CJ's Fourth, just so you can see it. It's a similar kind of game. So the CJ games in particular, they were sort of multi-directional scrolling, whereas CJ's Fourth was just simple left to right scrolling. I think it was only from left to right, and that was it. I don't think you could go the other way. I don't think it was multi-directional off the top of my head. I'll try and check afterwards. Got a bit more parallax scrolling on here for the Paris level, same sort of skyscrapers. So yeah, we're starting to recycle a lot here. This, I think, is the last level, so it's quite sparse. There's not much in it, so I think Finlay still had some work to do to polish it off at this stage. This was just really for waiting to have a playthrough and see how it was all looking. I don't think I can quite reach that bomb. Right. Okay. So that is pretty much it. And we can't skip any further, so that is all of the games. So just as a comparison really quickly, there's CJ's Fourth, the score panels at the top of the page. Similar sort of block levels, I think, to... I don't know if we've got them in there actually. Not on this particular level. No, different graphics on there, but yeah, the blocks that you got there are quite similar to what's in Captain Dynamo, similar sort of style overall. The backgrounds in particular from some of the other levels. But yeah, it was not a bad little platformer. It would have been a nice little release had it been had it maybe been done about a year earlier or something. I'm sure we would have been maybe talking about it fondly in the same way that we do about Turbo the Tortoise. Who knows? But at least here it is. Here's something of you that here's something that you can actually play. So you can go onto the Games website. You can download a copy of this for yourself and sort of check through it. Hopefully in the future we might find something more of it to kind of be able to share with you. So keep an eye on the website, and who knows what might turn up in the future. But hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll try and get a new one up and running soon for you. So please feel free to leave any comments about the game in general, about the video, and we'll speak to you soon.